Elana Bell is the author of Mother Country from BOA Editions that came out in October 2020. Her debut poetry collection is, let's just see, I'm going to not do the full screen so I can read. Can you all still see the screen? Good. Her debut poetry collection, Eyes Stones, was published by LSU in 2012. It was selected by Fanny Howe as the winner of the 2011 Walt Whitman Award from the Academy of American Poets. Mother Country is a breathtaking and mythical account of the complex, everyday, and porous realms of death and birth. With lyrical, imagistic intelligence and unwavering precision, Bell writes about the deaths of her unborn children, her grandmother, versions of herself, and her mother. The result is a steadfast and achingly clear record of a woman's mother route, which, among other things, traces the shape of her own mother's life and illness. She writes, "Through the dark, I feel my mother's wild eye. And my mother was a dead doll. I held her hand in the land of the dead and did not turn away." That's what Araceli Gourmet says about her wonderful new collection. The Rumpus says, Mother Country provides a tender look into a speaker's experience navigating her mother's declining health, losing a pregnancy, sharing her body, and contemplating transformations of all kinds. The book, compellingly and with rawness, explores concepts of womanhood, motherhood, and the pressures or expectations therein. Please help me welcome Ilana Bell.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Hudson Valley Writers Center. I'm really grateful to be here in this moment, in this particular historical moment, to be in what I call the country of poetry together. And super excited to be reading with Deborah Paredez and C.D.L. Young. I actually just moved to the Hudson Valley myself recently, so I'm actually looking forward to being able to be in person when things open up again and to experience this community in person. But in the meantime, very grateful to be able to experience it here with you on Zoom. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm going to be reading from my new collection, Mother Country, published by BOA Editions in October. And the poems in this collection really address motherhood, fertility, and mental illness. But they're also just about the experience of telling the truth about one's life, the messy parts, the shameful parts, the parts that social media would have you believe don't exist. And the epigraph for the collection is a quote from a poem of Muriel Rukeyser's, and she asks, "What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open." So I'm going to open actually with a song that I wrote, and that's going to lead directly into a poem. So thank you again for having me. You can make it sweet again. You can make it sweet again. Even when you feel like part of you has died, you can make it sweet again. You can taste the honey on your tongue. You can taste the honey on your tongue. Even when you're sure that the bitterness has come, you can taste the honey on your tongue. Ooh. love your own dark. You can learn to love your own dark. Even if it feels like an impossible lark, you can learn to love your own dark. Ooh, ooh. You can make it sweet again. You can make it sweet again. Miracle. What else to call the way the bare branches I'd bought at the neighborhood bodega came back to life that winter? I carried them home, dry, wrapped in paper, stuck them in the square vase, and as an afterthought, filled it with water. I don't know when I noticed the pale pink shoots sprouting from the submerged ends, wild reaching roots like ginseng or the hair on an old woman's chin. Then, tiny green leaves began to appear at the tips, curling over themselves with the sheer effort of growing. I thought they were dead. And now I recall being in the grip of a darkness I did not have a name for and didn't think I'd survive. I could try to describe it for you now, the nights I woke with my pulse pounding through, the heaviness of each breath, how the effort of being inside my body felt like burning. What I really want to tell you is this: how in the parch of that long drought, the people I loved kept bringing me water. Water, though I turned my back and did not answer to my name, though I flung the cup away. Let me say it plain, I wanted to die. But something in me, some tiny bulb still alive under all that rotted wood, kept drinking, kept right on drinking. You can hear my son in the background. Dropping my mother off at the electroconvulsive therapy ward. Do I look strange? She asks. The other patients with their flyaway hair and unblinking eyes wander the floor. You look like a movie star. The nurses suggest I get some air. Her eyes widen as I edge toward the door, leaving her in gloved hands, quick for a cure. As a girl, I followed her down any steep or muddied path. I catch my face in the sharp fluorescence of the bathroom mirror. Have my dark eyes darkened? Was that shadow there before? Who will I follow when she is gone? When they wheel her back to me, faint bloom of urine on her gown. What happened in that room while I drank coffee just outside the door? Mother, I've done what you would never do. Walked you to the edge, then turned away. So I don't know if any of you remember New York City. There was a blackout in 2003, and the whole city went dark. And my mother, in her delusion and illness, had the belief that somehow her thoughts had caused the blackout. My mother calls to tell me it's her fault. Her black thoughts the cause of this city gone dark. Each window a blank eye in the stone, the lost bodies below swarming hot concrete. Black as Hitler, she whispers through the wire, and the steam rises from a grate in the street. I tell her how last night on our block folks gave away beer and ice cream and all the meat they couldn't cook, and for the first time in years the Milky Way was visible. I did that? She asks. Elegy for Mother, Still Living. And the epigraph is by Jack Gilbert. The Lord gives everything and charges by taking it back. I was formed inside the body of a woman who wanted me as she wanted her own life, allowed to drink the milk made only for me. I was given mother love, its bounty and its cocoon of those first years without language. It is right to mourn the rocky hills of Crete where we walked, my small hand in hers for hours. The hidden beach where we swam naked, then baked on the fine sand. Lazy afternoons in her lap, her thick hand stroking my curls. Her fingers have stiffened. Her eyes, the eyes of an animal in pain. I hold my mother against the woman she is. So I'm going to transition to reading some of the poems about my own journey with fertility and trying to get pregnant with that human being that you can hear. And I don't know if this is true for others of you, but when I was in high school, in sex education, they basically made it sound like if you ever have sex without a condom, you're definitely getting pregnant. It was not my experience, and we had quite a journey towards pregnancy. And so this poem is called First Intrauterine Insemination. It was not making love, but we held hands anyway and looked into each other's eyes and not at the gloved hands as the tube went in. Alone, in the cold room, I rest with my feet in the air and picture the light entering my body. I name it Surya, meaning sun. There's a storm coming. Soon, this whole city will fill with white, a blank field. I will go out into the morning before the plows, out into the thick quiet and crouch, letting the dark fluid spill out of me to mark the baby that did not come. I will bury it like an animal. This time, I do not give it a name. All month, the blood collected in my uterus as if in a bowl. It drains out slowly, staining the hotel robe with my body's rust. This time, the blizzard does not surprise. Through the window, I watch snow swirl and cover the tops of buildings, the slick black street below. Nothing is new. Not this storm, not my blood, not these words. The amaryllis, spread in its fullness, blood petals open beyond open, the stamen's yellow tip calling the bee to gather what will become honey, calling him to the dark center, the part of a woman in common with the flower, which could swallow the bee, could swallow finger, cock, gun, from which the child's head and then its body breaks through. What dies in domesticity? Her mouth, something bloody in her teeth. She's deep in the woods they've cut away. What is it, this thing she's longing for, shining in the Facebook posts? She can't be satisfied, even with a ring. Isn't it enough? Soft clothes, fresh vegetables. Food comes in cardboard boxes or styrofoam. How much waste, the crawling things she kills, neighbors knowing what she throws away, shame. Closed-in walls, small squares of light, hard to keep alive in city salt. Perhaps a part she doesn't know herself by name. Letter to my son in utero. You are not the first. Before you, Another seed took hold, and every morning your father rubbed my belly in wonder at what she would become. When the doctor said, "No heartbeat," the air went out of me. My dead baby, I thought. They would not call it that. Embryo, 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 they said, a padded word meant to keep me from what I knew. Something had lived in me its whole small life and was gone. Forgive me for loving another before you. Forgive me also the weight of my love for you, already heavy with death. Forgive me. I am a Jew. In the middle of the celebration, I always smash the glass. I'm going to do two more. Invocation for my unborn. Little bird, little invisible, do you feel the pull of my silent song? Little bird, little beating heart, I cup my hands to make a world for you. Come, come, little one, yes, I call for you, out loud without shame. Again, I open to the tide of tiny swimmers and pray one reaches center. I've made my heart into a bowl for you, hungry teacher, little grower from between the worlds. I call you with all my breath and muscle, with this body made to fill with you. I call you from my tunneled center, my millions of eggs, any of which could be you. Call with my blood river, my throat and fat hands, with cooking spoon and iron pan. Little one, little bird, I feed with my mouth, particle grown from seed, little mystery, treasure, little all the names I do not know. Little you, I cannot find in all my folds. Little second heartbeat, I swear I hear when I stand at the shore. Little all the names I've named you in my second tongue, and all your names mean light. Little stranger, greedy bee, your absent wings tickle my womb. Little rib formed from my rib, little sexless fish in dark waters, little anchor tossed from the wooden boat of our loving. Little poem I do not have the words for, little incantation, come, come through the sea that knows your names, through black night with its stars for eyes, through the wind and all its directions, let it blow you home. You can hear, it's so funny to be reading these poems of longing for the child, and there he is in the next room. And I'm going to close with a poem called Prayer, which is kind of about the, as you can hear in these poems, my son was quite wanted, and then when he came, it was quite a shock, like the difference between the wanting of the child and the reality of the child. There is a distance, and I love him dearly. This was written very early in his infancy. Prayer. When you are crying, and I don't know why, when I cannot soothe or quiet you, when my nipples are sore and cracked from your merciless mouth, or when you refuse the breast, when I finger the purple stretch marks across my thighs and belly, the loose skin, the blood vessels burst around my eyes and cheeks and asshole, which are because you are. When I stink of puke and milk and shit, when I begin to lose my grown-up words from lack of use, when you push the cup of blended yams I've just prepared on the floor for the third time this week, and it isn't an accident, because you looked right at me before you sent it over the edge of your high chair. When I am on my knees before you, little ruler, begging you to eat, to sleep, to piss in the bowl, let me remember those many nights on my knees, praying to another God, begging for you to come, for life to take hold inside of me and bloom. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Deborah Paredez is a poet and interdisciplinary performance scholar whose lectures and publications examine Black and Latinx popular culture, poetry of war and witness, feminist elegy, cultural memory, and the role of divas in American culture. She is the author of the award-winning critical study, Selenidad, Selena, Latinos, and the Performance of Memory, and the poetry collections This Side of Skin and Year of the Dog from BOA 2020. Her poetry and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, NPR, Boston Review, Poetry, Feminist Studies, and elsewhere. She received her PhD from Northwestern University and her BA in English at Trinity University. She lives with her husband and daughter in New York City, where she is a professor of creative writing and ethnic studies at Columbia University, and she is also the co-founder of Cantamundo. In an interview in the Latinx Project, Deborah says, quote, "I have always been invested in memory, memorialization, and in particular, thinking about it within a kind of brown aesthetics. So for me, the book Year of the Dog refers to the year of the metal dog, the year of my birth, 1970, which was also the year my father was preparing to go to Vietnam. Many young working class and poor Black and brown folks were drafted to go to Vietnam. Like for many Latinx communities, when my father fortunately returned from war, there was such a tremendous silence in the house about it." And here's the beautiful book. Yusuf Kumanyaka says, Deborah Paredez' Year of the Dog refuses to lay static on white space. Time is a character in this engaging collection, beginning in the tumultuous late 60s and reaching into now, today. Each poem becomes lyrical evidence laid before us, personal and reckoned with. One feels the timeline has been lived, yet borders are crossed, fences jumped, and experimental detours, even graphic renderings, hold it all together. The echo of war and protest lingers. Year of the Dog is a song for now, as one confronts recent history through needful reflection. Please, all of you, help me welcome Deborah Paredez.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, Sophia, and it's really a joy to be reading with Ilana and with C. Dale, so thanks so much. I'm going to read mostly from Year of the Dog and then maybe one or two new works. Self-Portrait in the Year of the Dog, San Antonio, Texas, December 1970. It's nearing the end of the year, and the woman who will be my mother is pushing stick pins through the eyes of sequins and into styrofoam globes until each coated orb ornaments the tinseled tree. Her body is full of the curled question mark that will soon be my body. The woman who will be my grandmother is biding time at the 5 and dime, stockpiling supplies to fill my mother's idle hands. All along, she's carried me low. How I've known from early on to position myself for dissent. When I enter this world, I'll enter as Hecuba, nearing her end, purpled and yelping grief beast, my mother's spangled handiwork. So throughout the book, as Jennifer so generously noted, which refers in many ways to the year 1970, the year of my birth, but also I was drawn to that title also because I was hoping to evoke the figure of Hecuba, who, as many of you know, was the Queen of Troy, who was captured along with all the other Trojan women after the end of the Trojan War, and was being carried off to be a slave to the Greeks, as all the captured women were. But she was so sort of committed to her grief and horrors over the ravages of war that she wouldn't stop howling. And she howled and howled until she was transformed into a dog, and she leapt from the ship where they were taking her away. And she sort of freed herself from captivity among the Greeks, but lived her life howling as a dog out in the middle of the sea, spending her days mourning and howling against the violence that she witnessed and endured. In the book, I hope to, like Hecuba, do somewhat of the same. And I really was interested in, or am interested in, trying to get at some of the both words and images that we often kind of have become inured to their power, whether it's the photograph, or whether it's the kind of language like the idiom, right, which is sort of so everyday and used that we kind of tend to ignore what it might be holding. And so there are a number of poems in the book that are idiom poems, and idioms that have to do with body parts. So there's bodies strewn all over. A show of hands. My father taught me never to show my hand. Always play the hand you're dealt. Don't bite the hand that feeds, you gotta hand it to him. He lived his life hand to mouth. Even before Nam, he knew close only counts in horseshoes, and hand grenades go hand to hand combat. Idle hands are the devil's play into the enemy's, hand it over and out of his hands. Ringing a bird in hand is worth two. In the bush, he wasn't so good with his hands. Took his life into his own blood on his hands, on the one hand, and on the other. This next poem takes place in Chicago, Illinois on December 4th, 1969, which was the night that Fred Hampton was murdered by Chicago police. And that night he was in his apartment asleep with his partner, Deborah Johnson, who was also a member of the Black Panther Party. And she was 8.5 months pregnant at the time that the police shot through the apartment. Lightning for Deborah Johnson. You didn't look down or back. Spent the fractured minutes studying each crease and curve of the lawmen's faces, so later you could tell how it happened. How you crossed over his body. How you kept your hands up. How you didn't reach for anything, not your opened robe, nothing. How they said he's good and dead. How you crossed over the threshold. How you lifted one and then the other slippered foot across the ice. How you kept yourself from falling. How your bared belly bore the revolver's burrowing snout. How when the baby starts to descend, it's called lightning, though it feels like a weight you cannot bear. Lightning is when you know it won't be long before it's over. Year of the Dog, Aftermath, Jackson State College, May 14th and 15th, 1970. Were the days in which a school shooting occurred on the campus of Jackson State College when the National Guard marched in when students at the college, a historically Black college, were marching in an anti-war demonstration. For as long as folks can remember, the campus has been split by Lynch Street, the 4-lane thoroughfare leading back to town. The stoplights flashing red at the intersection of Lynch and any street it meets, making it so townsfolk can idle and rev their engines, cussing the dark students trying to cross. It's not long before the National Guardsmen march down, before the city police march up, before the students hear, "We're going to kill some of you, Nick," before the thrum and bleat that follows. Some students crouch under dorm room desks. Some students are running away. Some students stand still. Some students are falling down. Some students climb the stairs. Some students are screaming. Some students make no sound. Some students stay inside. Some students are bleeding out. Some students are bowing their heads over equations, finding the value of each variable, drawing lines that intersect in the shape of a cross or an X. If 100 students peaceably gathered, if 647 National Guardsmen on duty in Jackson, Mississippi, if 40 highway patrolmen, if 27 city police, if greater than 200 rounds fired, if 460 buckshots fired, if 28 seconds of gunfire, if 140 bullet marks on Alexander Women's Dormitory, if 24 windows into which shots are fired, if 18 metal panels pocked with buckshot, if one wine bottle dropped from a dormitory window, if 0 shots fired from inside the dormitory, if 0 windows left unshattered by gunfire, then 17-year-old James Earl Green is dead. Then 21-year-old Philip Lafayette Gibbs is dead. Then 12 more students hospitalized. Then one photograph of the shattered facade. Then one bullet-branded, not twisted, white curtain still hanging on. Then 2 dark faces of the risen women looking out of the pain-emptied frame. Self-portrait with weeping women. I know why I fell hard for Hecuba. Shins, skin, and lips split to blooming lupin on her throat's rough coat. Hurled down the whole length of disaster. I'm sure I'd grown to know by then, to slacken as a sail against the current and squall of a woman's woe. What could I do but chorus my ruddered howl to hers? When you're a brown girl raised up near the river, there's always a woman bereft and bank-wrecked, bloodied and bleeding her insistent lament. Ah, Llorona. Every crossing is a tomb and a tune, a wolf wail, and the moon that turns me to scratch at the tracks of every mud-dirged girl. Year of the Dog, Walls and Mirrors, fall 1982. This was the year that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was being constructed. And it begins with an epigraph, this poem, by Maya Lin, the designer of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. She wrote in that year, "The wall dematerializes as a form and allows the name to become the object. The English translation of my surname is Walls, misspelled. The original S turned to its mirrored twin, the Z, the beginning of the sound for sleep. I'm nearly 12, and the mirror is a disaster I learned to turn away from. The girl looking back, always looking to extract her pound of flesh. I had a simple impulse to cut into the earth Myelin is writing, as the mirrored wall of names she's made is arranged and laid against the riven hillside. I never looked at the memorial as a wall, she writes, but as an edge to the earth, an opened side. For a wall to become a mirror, it must not absorb or scatter too much light. For a girl to become the protagonist, she must sleep with the guy or until he kisses her awake. Sometimes we know she's the fairest one of all because of the mirror on the wall. Sometimes she must scale the city's walls to bury the guy. Antigone cuts into the earth to give him his proper memorial. She ends up the heroine and buried alive, an in-between thing, like someone who's 11 or nearly 12. When I look at the number 11, I see two walls, my name and its mirrored twin. Sometimes 11 resembles the mirrored L's at the end of wall, or the beginning of llanto, the Spanish word for weeping. Sometimes 11 looks like a pair of railway sleepers arranged and laid along a track that's always leading me back to my war-worn father. Sometimes the guy comes back from battle and has seizures in his sleep, and the girl must shake him awake. Sometimes the wall and the name are one and the same. Sometimes the wall is where we end up to begin letting go our llanto. And then I'm gonna read, let's see, how much time do I have? Okay, good. I'm gonna read a poem that I wrote last year, one of the few poems I wrote last year. Yes, I wrote this last fall. Falling Bodies. I am not alone in watching my body giving up its truths. The dark taint of the dye job giving way to the gray. The fallen breasts, the slope and folds of my mother-marked belly mound. I'm not yet 50, and already I've outlived some I've seen naked. The lovers I left, the children I watched die. I've long known how to look for the bullet left lodged in the chamber when unloading the gun. My aim isn't so good, nor my vision. It's getting harder and harder to read without pushing the page farther from my eyes. I haven't seen Thea since before the outbreak, only the sign outside the nursing home proclaiming its name, Buena Vida. In another time of plague, Galileo observed the speed of falling bodies, how, no matter the differing weight of two objects, falling is an equalizing force. Imagine them, he wrote, joining together while falling. Sometimes when you watch someone die, the only sound you hear is your own shredded breath. Other times, their ragged gasps rending the garment of this realm. I watch the circling hand touch every number, hear the seconds stacking themselves into minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, the teetering years collapsing behind me, before me. I've had to give up running since I tore something in my hip, the same one where years ago I rested the baby and years before that I dipped and flared on the dance floor. My back now gives way when I bend over to pull the load of soaked clothes from the machine. The doctor says only resistance and movement will begin to repair what's torn. At the end of the march, I bend toward the ground with the others, kneeling in silence for 9 minutes, 29 seconds, spinning hover of helicopter blades and my daughter's fidgeting hands, the only sounds I hear. At the end of his life, half blinded by cataracts, Galileo still found a way to measure the distance between bodies scattered across the sky, observed the ways the moon rocked itself back and forth, as if saying no against the night. My daughter watches her dancing body on the video she's made in the living room. Another brown girl has filmed us all kneeling. Another woman's daughter has taken a cell phone video of a man as he is murdered in the street. All the girls watching. When we watch someone maybe we love, or someone maybe we don't even know. Someone who is someone's grown child dying under the knee of another. The sound we hear is his muddled breath, his crying out for his mother, long gone and risen and rocking and rocking and rocking him still. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Deborah. And thank you for reading that poem tonight. Really powerful reading, thank you. Cedale Young practices medicine full-time. He is the author with 4-way books of The Affliction, a novel in stories, and the poetry collections, The Second Person, a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Poetry, Torn, named one of the best poetry collections of 2011 by NPR, The Halo, and Prometeo. His most recent book has been reviewed in Publishers Weekly, has been featured in Lambda Literary's February Most Anticipated LGBTQ Books list, featured in the Millions Must Read Poetry from February 2021, featured in Library Journal's Books and Authors to Know, Poetry Titles to Watch for 2021. He has also received the Haynes Award in Poetry given by the Fellowship of Southern Writers to honor a poet at mid-career. He has been a fellow for the NEA and the Guggenheim, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation. He lives and practices medicine in San Francisco. In a wonderful interview with Kaveh Akbar in Dive Dapper, Cedale spoke about the fact that he writes about 4 finished poems per year. He says, quote, "I have to make time for poetry. That's the major thing. I get up at 5 so that I have an hour to read. I have an hour to work on a draft of something. I have that hour to get things done that I know I can't get done during the rest of the day, because for the vast majority of the day, I'm a physician. So from about 7:30 or 8 a.m. until 4 to 7 p.m., that's what I'm doing. I don't have any real relation to poetic things during that time. I love poetry, so I make time for it. We are very grateful that you make time for poetry, Cedale Young. Please help me welcome Cedale Young.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to read with Ilana and Deborah. And I'm just going to read several poems from Prometeo. And the first one is titled At Lake Merced. Some men go down to the river. I went down instead to the lake, the air silent and stretched tightly over it, the water unmoved and dangerously still. Some men move past such a scene without even the slightest notice of it. But this morning, a man in a shell rode across this lake's smooth surface, the tip of his shell leaving a widening V behind it, the shell cleanly slicing through the water like an arrow, the way an arrow slices through air or flesh. And just like that, the image of the saint pierced through by arrows becomes fixed within my head. The arrows all leaving V's behind them, V for violence, as if the very air were an impasto on canvas. And just like that, the arrows slicing through the air become bullets, each one leaving its V behind it, the paint at the target dabbed with a red duller than crimson. You may wonder why on earth a man shot through centuries ago would appear to me upon seeing this tiny shell of a boat crossing a lake, but the present day does a remarkable job of emulating the past. Let us leave it at that. Some men find nothing, and others find omens everywhere. The stillness of the air above the lake, the shells slicing through the water, the saint shot through with arrows yet living, breathing, his chest heaving, his head slumping, while the arms remain perfectly still, and the brown boy shot through with bullets, his wounds a red duller than crimson. Things like this still happen almost every day. This next poem I'm going to read is titled Mestizaje. At the ruins of Tulum, on a boulder half buried in sand, on the famous beach below the often photographed pyramid that stares out at the sea, I found a petroglyph overlaid in white chalk to better demonstrate the bird-like thing carved into the rock's side. I had seen it before, in Cuba maybe, or Puerto Rico, somewhere on one of the islands out across this sea, watched over here by trees and pyramids. The bird on this boulder, like the one I had seen elsewhere, had only one leg. But this should come as no surprise, the Taino having left this soil many hundreds of years ago to search for new land, new coastlines. They made landfall all across the Antilles and flourished until the Spaniards arrived. As the textbooks will tell you, the Taino are extinct, the people and their culture extinguished by Spain long ago. But tell that to the old brujas, the old island women who will proclaim we are of this dirt and can send any man who stands against us back to the dirt. The irony of this is legion. One did not need a laboratory to cross the tangerine and the grapefruit to make the tangelo, and the Spaniards did not need a laboratory to cross the Taino with themselves. So when I stand here on this beach at Tulum, is it any wonder we all look like cousins? Not the Spaniards who dabbled in the witchcraft of mestizaje, not the Spaniards who claimed all of this region as their own. No, it is the Taino, cousins to the Maya, that link us. Peer into the DNA of many Caribbean people, and you will find that 10 to 20% of it is indigenous, is Taino. We are of this dirt. We cannot be killed off, the old women say. And in the base pairs of our DNA, we discover the truth. One can hide many things, but the truth is always there. An ancient god buried himself in the dirt that gave rise to the Taino. And with time, the Taino themselves were buried. This is all true, but they are not dead. No, not dead. They are buried within us. I told someone years ago that I almost never write about anything directly in medicine. And part of the reason is that I don't want to ever feel as if I'm betraying one of my patients. And this next poem is actually the only poem where I've ever done that, and it's because the patient is not around, and I don't feel the same sense of betrayal. It was also a lesson for me, which I've carried with me. So it's titled "The Point." His other doctors proclaimed that he would die within a month. He kept on living for years. The simple fact is that he was barely 30, but had been dying for almost 2 of them. The urge for prophecy is deep and deeply rooted inside the gnarled and human heart. We seek it out, its shiny metallic edge. The cancer spread to his bones and then his liver. Each time it appeared, we treated it with radiation. We stalled it, held it back until it spread to his lungs, making every treatment that I proposed seem less and less an option. So this is it. You're just going to let me die. Mono, you leave me here to die like this? But here you see, the tongue is wiser than a knife. The word selected, not just brother, but a word that cut far deeper than English ever could. The urge to prophecy is deep, but not a given. I gave no answer. I gave him nothing more. And when I tried to rest my hand against his arm, he turned away from me and said to leave him now, to which he added mono again to drive the sharpened point home. The fact is, he was barely 30 years old, and I had failed him. Run out of things to try. Not even I could blame him for that finely honed stab, that carefully chosen Spanish word. To some, the owl is a symbol of death to come. For others, it is the guardian that ferries souls. I'm still not sure to which one I subscribe, but there was not an owl in sight that morning, barely a week since trying to talk to him, and nothing to see outside except the dark. I knew that something was off, was terribly wrong. No matter how I tried to calm my mind, I stood there thinking about it all, our final conversation, my failures, what now? I tried to reassure myself that I had done all I could have done for him. Some of us study the future and others the past. It makes no difference at all. At work that day, his sister called to let me know he died. He passed that morning, just before the sun had started rising. Why I knew this then, knew it before the news had yet to come, troubles me even to this day. Not English, not brother, bother buried within the word. Instead, the Spanish word he knew would leave a mark, would slice to the bone, sharp as a knife. I love to joke with some of my students, my graduate students, that there are many different languages and they all say, yeah, Spanish, Portuguese. And then I say things like, well, like the language of dirt or sugar or salt. And they often don't realize that I'm just playing with them and they get very tense. This poem partially comes from that. This is about the language of sugar. It's titled Portrait in Sugar and Simple Prayer. The language of sugar isn't difficult to master. One learns it as easily as any other tongue. You may not believe me, but it is true. As a boy lost in the cane fields, I made a mistake. Who doesn't make mistakes? And for this small error, I was punished. The sweet sugar cane becoming weapon, becoming punisher. Each time the man brought the body of the cane stalk down across my back, I cried out. Would you believe me if I told you that today I wouldn't even whimper at such a thing? Because now I know how to brandish a stalk, how to bring it down as testament, how to make the nothing of air sing before the strike. And because, well, now I know how to accept punishment as well. You punish or are punished. It really is that simple. Dominus, Holy Father, I have hidden myself in the cane field. I may have sinned. My back is bare and in need of your administrations, not salt in the wound, Lord, but sugar, sugar as sharp as the metallic taste of blood in the mouth. Make me regret this, Lord. Make me, strike me, Lord. Strike me harder than any man. Make of me something sweeter than sugar. I have a lot of these odd portraits in this book. I hadn't really thought about it at first. I suspect it's my discomfort in doing the self-portrait. I'm a terrible painter. I can paint landscapes. I started out as a painter, but I'm not very good at painting human form, and I'm really terrible at painting myself. So I think some of this stretches all the way back to my origins. This poem is titled Portrait in Ochre and 7 Whispers, and it's in 7 sections. 1. To make and remake one's self is the artist's job, I believed. And so, in poems, I gave myself wings. But even then, I made sure the wings could not support flight, could not lift me to safety. Even my imagination failed me. 2. The first time I tried to kill myself, I swallowed a bottle of Tylenol, pill after pill, like the sacrament of communion placed on my tongue. 3. You were supposed to save us. You were supposed to help save our souls. Isn't that part of the vow you made to God when choosing the life you did? You must have forgotten that. You didn't kill my soul, but you didn't save it either. 4. I'm never late anymore, never late to anything, because I still wonder if I hadn't dawdled after practice, if I had showered with the other boys instead of waiting, if there are always so many ifs. Would you have stopped if I had screamed, if I had fought harder? I still find it so easy to list off the ifs. 5. My second lie came when I woke in the hospital and told my parents I swallowed the pills because I was being bullied at school. An easy lie, much easier than the truth. The third lie, the promise I would never try to kill myself again. 6. The woman killing my parents, the sudden and uncontrolled rising from the ground as people gawked and screamed, the vomiting up of gold coins, dreams I have had repeatedly over all these years. 7. I found your obituary, the memorial, the pictures of you as a kindly old priest. You are dead now. I wanted to write my own statement for you, to shame you, to tell the world how you pinned the 13-year-old me to the wall in a gym shower, put your hands around my neck and sodomized me. But shame is never an equal transaction, is it? Shame, the one thing I cannot live with, cannot live without. I'm gonna close with, I call it my birthday poem. My birthday was just this past weekend. And it's the only poem I've ever written having anything to do with my birthday. And it sounds absurd, but it's actually true. Even though it's probably the strangest poem I'm going to read to you, it is 100% true. between the dragon and the phoenix. Fire in the heart, fire in the sky, the sun just a smallish smudge resting on the horizon, out beyond the reef that breaks the waves, fiery sun that waits for no one. I was little more than a child when my father explained that the mongrel is stronger than the thoroughbred, that I was splendidly blended, genetically engineered for survival. I somehow forgot this, misplaced this, time eroding my memory as it erodes everything. But go ask someone else to write a poem about time. Out over the bay, the sun is rising and I am running out of time. Each and every year on my birthday, I wake to watch the sunrise. I am superstitious. And today, as in years past, it is not my father, but my father's father who comes to shout at me. Whether you like it or not, you are a child of fire. You descend from the dragon, descend from the phoenix. Your blood is older than England, older than Castile. Year after year, he says the same thing, this old man dead long before I was born. So I wake each year on the day of my birth to watch the fire enter the sky while being chastised by my dead grandfather. Despite being a creature of fire, I stay near the water. Why even try to avoid what can extinguish me? There are times I can feel the fire flickering inside my frame. The gulls are quarreling, the palm trees shimmering, the world keeps spinning on its axis. Some say I have 9 lives. Others think me a machine. Neither is true. The truth is rarely so conventional. Fire in my heart, fire in my veins. I write this down for you and watch as it goes up in flames. There are no paragraphs wide enough to contain this fire, no stanzas durable enough to house it. Blood of the dragon, blood of the phoenix. I turn my head slowly toward the east. I bow and call for another year. I stand there and demand one more year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great reading.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We do have questions in the chat.
The first question that we got is there one poem you have written that says who you are and or how you see the world? And I believe that's a question for all 3 poets.
That's an impossible question. I'm like, at which stage in my life, at which moment in my... That's a hard question. I don't know, do you all have your answer ready? Deborah, Dale?
I mean, I guess I would have to say that I feel I've spent my entire life trying to write the poem that is me. I don't know that I've actually written it yet. I feel like I keep getting closer. I have this horrible feeling that when I write it, I'm going to look at it and go, oh my God, I'm going to die now. I don't know, Deborah?
I feel the same. I feel like it's like an asymptote, right? I just keep, maybe I'll get closer and closer. I mean, I guess I would say, there's a poem I didn't read tonight. It's the first poem in the book. It's like a retelling of the Lot's wife story, thinking about what if we imagine Lot's wife turns back because she wants to bear witness to the burning city. And it's sort of like the person I wish I could be, which is like the one I wish I could be, that person who will stand still and look into the disaster and not look away. Like that's like the Ars Poetica I wish I could follow. Mm-hmm. So maybe I've written aspirational ones, but I'm going to spend my life trying to approach it, I guess.
Yeah, I really do feel like at each stage in my writing, I have a different, that would be a different poem. Like, I mean, I have a poem from the first book called Your Village, which is really not about me, but it's more about how I see the world and like destruction and our like interrelatedness, which I would say is probably the most like my worldview. But then it's so different from like what I'm writing now, which is much more kind of intimate and about the body. So it's, I feel like it changes over time.
Thank you all. We have a comment from Lynn McGee. She says it's not really a question, but it's for Deborah. She says the rhetorical strategy of interruption in your poems, a phrase interrupted, a word left hanging, is really suspenseful. It yanks the reader out of the pool of your words, and we're left gasping for the next line. The poems are often about lives interrupted, often through violence. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or if you have anything to add to your thinking about what Lynn just said in the chat.
Thank you for such a generous reading, first of all, of the work. I really appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate how, I mean, it was just so amazing to listen to you, Elana and C. Dale. It was incredible. I feel really, really honored to be here. I think that the interruptions, part of it was I sometimes felt when I was writing the book, especially with the idiom poems, that I was not trusting the reader enough. And so I felt like by pulling back on the completion of the line was also a way of trusting the reader, but it was also a way of having, I think the book works a lot around fragmentation. Both, it's a book that has a lot of images that are themselves fragmented and torn up and rearranged. So I think that I am, in this book in particular, working with that sense of incompletion, both in terms of, bodies that are rendered, incomplete, but also in terms of the fact that I'm talking a lot about my father, I'm telling the story of the daughter, right? It's my father's story. And there's so much that I can't access of that story, right? Because I was, even as the war had come home, there was a lot I couldn't access. So I think I was hoping to use that sense of interruption or incompletion to try to kind of get at that. So thank you.
Deborah, we had a wonderful presentation in my MFA class last time on your book, and Stephanie is here in the audience tonight who did that presentation. But one of the things that she talked about was how unusual it is to see a book that is such a hybrid like this. I don't know, some of you who don't have the book yet, you could see that Deborah was very creative with this, and her editors, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what BOA's response to that was, if it was collaborative, if there was push and pull, but it is very rare to see this much of a collage and photographs and text that's handwritten from letters, but it's very stunning and such a wonderful use and innovative use of hybrid work.
Thank you. I'm obviously really informed by a lot of folks who are doing this kind of documentary poetry work. Don Choi and Solma, there's so many, right, folks who are I think are doing this work. But for me, also, in many ways, the book began when, as a child, because there was so much silence about the war in my family, as there are for many people who grew up with people who had been in war, whether they're, I'm good friends with children, refugees, who are children of refugees from Vietnam in particular, and or veterans. And so there was so much silence that I used to sneak into my dad's room and go through his photo albums from the war to try to figure out maybe there's an answer in here. And years later, my mom sort of found the photo album, and she knew somehow that I was sneaking in all those years. So she sent me the photos, and she's like, hurry up and scan these before your dad notices they're gone, and then see what you want to do with them. So I had all these photos for years and kept thinking I'm done with Vietnam. Like, oh my God, I wrote about that in my 20s. I'm so over my dad. I'm not going to write about that anymore. And it's like, damn it, it wasn't done with me. As I think happens for so many of us. And so I wanted to use that archive. And so much of those photos were snapshots my dad took. He was 19, 20, right? So there really were like snapshots of various landscapes as well as other kinds of things and captions on the back that he would write. And so I wanted to use that archive against the kind of photographic archive we often associate with Vietnam, which often silences like poor brown people like him. So that was part of what motivated the kind of the fragmentation of images. I also never show his face because I also wanted to kind of preserve his privacy. So there was a lot of attempts to kind of meld that archive or use that archive to interrupt, right, the archive that we often think of.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. It's, she was thanking you for this book and wondering how you decided on the images.
Yeah, I think some of
Probably
that
had so many of them.
Yeah. Sometimes it was like attempting to get like a visual rhyme happening with images. Sometimes it was body parts. A lot of them, as you notice, are of just parts of bodies. Yeah.
Sophia, do we have another question in the chat?
Well, there's not another question in the chat, but I have a question. Particularly with the poems that the three of you have chosen to read tonight, there's such a theme of the body and kind of the body as home or the body as landscape. So how do you see the body as a theme in your own work? And how do you see it interacting with the other themes and obsessions in your poetry?
Oh, I was so praying someone else was going to answer first.
I can go first if you want.
Well, the funny thing is, I mentioned that when I started out as a painter, and I was very good at painting landscapes and not so good at painting human form. And when I published my first book, I very quickly felt a lot of displeasure about it. I know whenever I say that, people think it's me being ridiculous, but I would read it within a couple of years of having published it and feel like it didn't do what I wanted to do as a poet. And I had a very long conversation with a good friend of mine. She's passed away now, the poet Bridget Kelly. And she said, well, there's no reason why you can't use what you use to write about landscapes, but use it to write about people. Like, people have emotional landscapes. And I don't know why this was like so astounding to me, but it was like, whoa. And I feel as if all I've done since that day from my second book on is try to write about the kind of landscapes within people. I don't know that I think of the body as an abstract thing, as a landscape, but everything that we experience is through our bodies. I mean, I know that people talk about artificial intelligence and how it's going to be no time at all before we're going to have little chips that will feed us everything into our brains directly. I have real doubt about that.
Good.
I just feel like, no, I don't know that I want to be a cyborg. But I don't know. I think most poets relish the things of the world that are around them, and the way to those things are through the body. So I suspect that's why many of us write that way. That, or we're all crazy in the same way.
I'll answer too, just thinking about, so my first book of poems, which is a very different book, as I mentioned, it was about Israel and Palestine. It was a lot of persona work. but I remember, and I think this, I'm curious actually for both of you in terms of when you know you have a book, or when it's just like random poems, like when it becomes like, oh, these belong together, like they're family. But with that book, even more than this book, it was very clear, like it was very specific. I was exercising something inside of myself that I needed to understand. And I remember for me, like the central question in that book was like, how do two narratives live in one body? Like how do I, as a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, hold that truth that is my grandmother's truth and her experience, and the truth of the Palestinian, not abstract, but like people who I was in relationship with, whose bodies I was in relationship with, and who viewed the land as a body. I mean, they really, my Palestinian friends would speak about her as a mother, and they would like really like treat the land as a body. So like even when I wasn't like, and then that's not the literal body, like the human body, but it was very much related. And then I don't know, I'm like not exactly answering your question, but I'm just talking about bodies in my work, I guess. And then in Mother Country, it was like the war was in my body, because it was like I became a mother, and then suddenly like I understood the patriarchy in a way that I never had. I understood like how devalued my body was as like, because it like here it had been the means of production of a human, but I couldn't be the means of production in the way that I had as like a a money making, like in career. It was very like and then it was like all of like my body and my like that became what I could write about also, because that was where I was so like what had come out of my body, the ways my body had betrayed me, like physically, mentally, and then it was like my world when my son was very young was really confined to his body and my body and the body of our apartment. Like the world became very small. And so, whereas my previous book was much about travel and world and being in the body of this country that I loved and was dealing with. So anyway, that's the ways that the body has like played into my work currently.
Thank you for answering that question. Deborah, do you have anything to add about the body?
I really feel so moved by the way each of you, Cedale and Elena, have talked about, like, the way that I feel like I could talk to you for a long time about motherhood, having similarly kind of dealt with that sort of the representations of it are so overdetermined, and, and the way the patriarchy works on us, right? As you said, so having that kind of searing honesty around the body of the mother and of the child, and that particular kind of relationship is so refreshing. And I think, Cedale, when you talk, that poem that ends with the reference to shame, right? Being able to live with it and without it. I think that like, that is what our body carries, right? Or some of our bodies, right? Depending on how we've been forced to move through the world. And I just feel very moved by that, today. And sort of, it really resonates with me in the ways that I've both experienced my body in, beyond my poetry, just in the world. As a brown girl, as I say in my work. And I think in this book, obviously, that it is all about the ways that the body is rendered completely asunder, right? By war and violence. Yeah.
Thank you for those answers. We have a lot of students in the room tonight, especially those who are writing their first collections. They're working on manuscripts right now, and each of you is so honest and open and vulnerable in your poetry. And I'm just wondering if, what advice you might have to these emerging poets who are sending their work out and getting to journals and getting accepted now for the first time and putting their collections together.
Advice in terms of like the publication route, or advice in terms of like how vulnerable to be? I'm not, there's sort of like a couple threads.
Just, anything you'd want to let them know, things that maybe you wish you were told when you were just starting out and in your submission process for your first collections.
The best advice I ever got was, rejection is inoculation. So like, you have to get more of it to get better at it. And so I think that, I mean, and that in fact, the more you get at it, the less it bothers you, right? So now
So true.
it's a Tuesday, right? Okay. And that, I think that women and folks of color in general, like when they did those surveys, were the most likely, often, especially those starting out, were the most likely not to resubmit or to like resubmit to places or to take rejected stuff and like send them to the next place. So know that, and know that like you don't want to be part of that statistic. You want to just like ruthlessly keep sending it out.
I often tell my students that you almost have to create two of yourself, one that's like the agent you and one that's the writer you. And like writer you, your job is simply to write, revise, follow whatever you need to follow to write the next poem. And agent you is just going to be like, which 8 magazines can I submit to next quarter? And I'm not going to let 3 poems come home and sit there for more than 2 days before sending them out again. And it sounds absurd, but like the more you cultivate agent you, the less, like Deborah was saying, rejection bothers you. Like I get rejected. Everyone gets rejected. I mean, when I was starting out, I thought my teachers were like, well, some of my teachers were a little bit like gods. They would write a poem and it would appear in the New Yorker. But, many of them later admitted they got rejected too. So I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing in that I think when you first start sending out work, you feel when you get rejected that somehow you failed or something. It's like, no, the editor might not have liked your poems. Another editor will love your poems. Send them out. You shouldn't be sitting around spending weeks thinking about, oh my God, should I switch the poems up? Nope, just stick them back in the mail. You almost have a list ready to go. Like, here are the next 7 places. And the minute something comes back, boom. That's agent you. You just do it.
I feel like it's such a I think when you're young, when one is younger, it's like there's so much attached to the idea of like publication, the book, the journal, like there's all this, and how do I phrase this? Like okay, so this is going to sound annoying, but I'm just going to say it. Like, so my first book won the Walt Whitman, which is like big deal, right? I thought it would change everything and me and it meant nothing. It didn't give me a career. I couldn't get a college teaching job to save my life. Like, and the other thing about that was like the initial, it was like 1,500 applicants and only 50 got to Fanny Howe. Any of those 50, I think, are probably as good poets as me and maybe better. And maybe some in the 1,500. Like, that stuff doesn't actually mean anything. It's like, it like means that whatever thing got you through to that thing and a door open. I mean, yes, Deborah, you're mentioning, of course, there are certain factors that like of Old Boys Network that might have like, but I think in a lot of ways, it's like what student, because a lot of shit gets read by like interns and students before it even gets, so whatever aesthetic they're into at the time, if your work doesn't fit that, it's like there's so many random things that actually lead to the and I have to say, like, many of the poems in Mother Country would not get, but even after it had already been accepted by BOA for publication, and I included in my cover letter, like, this book will be coming out in a year with BOA, wouldn't get published. Like, couldn't place a lot of them in journals, and I was very surprised and disappointed. But it's like, well,
That's the writing life.
That's just it. It got published by a press that I adore and like I feel so proud of. And I guess the journals that nobody reads anyway anymore. So it just feels like it's so random. And it's like, and then I think about poets that I love, and it's like it's about the long game, honey. It's like about like Carolyn Forche. She's like, a book a decade, honey. That's what she said to me. A book a decade, honey. Like. You know what I mean? Like, slow your roll, like, and don't worry about it. Like, just keep writing. If if submitting is your thing, like, keep submitting. Like CDL said, it's 2 tracks. Like, the writer like, just keep working, keep writing, keep honing your craft. The other stuff will come or it won't, but in the end, it won't matter because, poetry is not a moneymaker. Like, you don't make money from, you make money if you get a teaching job or you get an appearance or whatever, maybe. But it's like, do this thing because you love it, and then but it's like two different tracks, and just keep submitting or keep. And then also I think that the best for me, most of my quote success has been because of communities that I've been involved in. Like and when I say that, it's like you can't bullshit that. It's like you have to really invest in communities, like getting to know other people's writing, like forming your own. Like I think about like the Dark Noise Collective or other like groups that have really like created their own like constellation and then been found or been seen or made connections. And I think that like that's another way to think, like not just in terms of like the huge giant, you know, black hole of literary magazines that you could or could not get published in. I hope that doesn't sound too cynical.
It's not cynical though, because you know I meet people all the time who say things like, well, I sent this poem out 6 times and it didn't get taken. And I look at them and I'm like, what? And you know, and they look back at me and I'm like, okay, I have a poem that I sent out 39 times because my limit is 40. I figure that was what Marianne Moore used. So if it's good enough for Marianne Moore. So I'm always like, am I going to hit 40? Because if I hit 40, I have to kill the poem. And I hit 39 and the poem appeared in Poetry.
What?
Yeah.
You know, and I have another poem that was rejected like 30 something times and was in Best American Poetry after it appeared in a magazine. So I mean, like, you can't hang your hat on, oh my God, 6 editors didn't like this poem. Like, who cares? Just send it out. You know, write more poems.
Yeah, this is very refreshing advice and very, very useful advice to our students. And I think it helps a lot hearing it from the 3 of you.
Yeah, I mean, rejection is just part of it.
It really is. We really have to have a thick skin.
And also not be, I think, you know, resonating with that idea, like the thing I always say about poetry is, you know, we picked up, you know, we have a calling or we picked a profession in which there really isn't a marketplace for it. So we have this opportunity to not abide by market values, right? Which is really, really hard, right? I mean, it's like the ideology, right? That's sort of honest all the time. But if we can really, like, what does that mean? It means I actually don't have to abide by capitalist time, right? A book a decade, right? I don't have to abide by capitalist output, right? Like that to me, I mean, my students are sick of it because I say it all the time, right? Like, what does it, like, this is the one thing it gives us, poetry gives us, right? It may not give us a job. It's certainly not going to give us a livelihood on its own, right? But it can give us that, which is pretty amazing if we can try to abide by it, you know, which is hard. I know. It's really hard.
That's very inspiring. Thank you all so much for this amazing reading and for your answers to your questions. Don't forget that it's been recorded. So if you have someone you want to send it to, Sophia will send it to us in the next day or so, and you can share it.